Are you stuck in a freeze response? Stick around and see if this sounds like you. So, first, let's differentiate between a freeze response, a shutdown dorsal response, and a functional freeze response. Hi, I'm Britt. I am a somatic experiencing practitioner, soma meaning body oriented, and I am a nervous system expert. So, really quick, let me give you just a lay of the land when it comes to the nervous system. Consider your nervous system like a ladder with three states. At the top of the nervous system is that ventral state of safety and connection. This is known as your rest and digest state. This is where you're in homeostasis and you're in a state of connection. When you go down the ladder to the middle, you go to your sympathetic response, which is your fight or flight response. This is the state of protection. And when you go down to the bottom of the ladder, this is your dorsal vagal complex, known as your shutdown state. This is the state of disconnection. So, connection, protection, disconnection. Now, where do freeze and functional freeze fall on the ladder? So, freeze and functional freeze are actually what we call blended or hybrid states of the nervous system. And they sound just like they're described. They're a little bit of two different states. So, your shutdown state is when you're in a state of hibernation. Okay, this is where you retreat into a turtle shell, you're conserving energy, you feel lethargic, life feels kind of hopeless, hollow, empty, you feel numb, you dissociate, you have very little energy. Now, when you're in a freeze state, think of your freeze state as your shock state. So, not shut down, but shock. This is where things feel life threatening, like a deer in the headlights. And this is where you're in a bit of a fight or flight response. Like there's so much intense mobilizing energy of fight or flight that your nervous system gets overwhelmed and freezes you in place. So, this is where you might feign or play dead or faint or collapse. Now, in comparison, your functional freeze state, which is where a lot of us are in our modern day culture, is your state of autopilot. So, again, it's a blended state. It's a little bit of your flight response. Okay, you're mobilizing, you're fleeing, you're moving, you're going, you're running away and distracting, but it's also a little bit of that shutdown response. So we feel numb, we suppress emotions, we don't talk about or get into our feelings. We are going through the motions, we're staying busy, we're overachieving, overworking, and keeping ourselves distracted. Now, it's important to note that we go up and down the nervous system ladder all day, probably 100 times a day. So there's nothing wrong with being in these states, but what we don't want is to get chronically stuck in these states. We should be able to move up and down that nervous system ladder all day long with flexibility and fluidity. And this is what we call a resilient or a regulated nervous system. Nervous systems that get chronically stuck in these lower states are nervous systems that are dysregulated. So they're not flexible, but they're rigid. So, how do these states land with you? Do you find that you're chronically in any of these states, whether it's shut down, low energy, whether it's freeze, which is that shock state, or whether it is that functional freeze, which is autopilot, busy, 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 but numb, numb, numb? Let me know in the comments how it lands.